Good day, everyone. My name is Rhoa Apuya from Bisawatri, and my report is Chapter 9 Regulatory Compliance in the Healthcare Setting. When we say regulatory compliance, this is the goal that organizations aspire to achieve in their efforts to ensure that they are aware and take steps to comply with relevant law, policies, and regulations. My topic is all about implementing new or revised policies, policy and procedure development guidelines, recommendation and rationale, red rules, standardizing policy across the system, and lastly, electronic policy libraries. First, I will discuss the implementing new or revised policies. The organization has a duty to inform all affected personnel prior to the effective date of a new or revised policy. Failure to do so may cause a staff member to follow an outdated policy, possibly comprising patient care as well as potential allegations of corporate negligence. This topic explained that if the organization has a new revised policy, they are required to implement those policies to the staff and to the member of the organization. An outdated policy may cause failure to patient care and all affected workers. To protect the organization from corporate negligence claims, the communications that affirms all affected workers, including floating, part-time, and traveling employees, have reviewed the new or revised policy prior its effective date should be collected and kept on file. By allowing a period of time between the approval date of a policy and its effective date, managers have time for associate training. Legal counsel should determine the length of time documentation of this type of training should be maintained. Factoring in applicable status of limitations means the approval date of policy and its effective date, the manager should have time to associate trainings. This is the type of training that the staff need to be maintained. When a new policy or procedure pertains to the use of a new medical device, pharmaceutical agent, or clinical procedure, hands-on training may be warranted in addition to sharing information about the written policies. In addition, if the new policy pertains, the staff should allow to share the information about written policy. Although such training may be provided by the manufacturer, vendor, or some in the organization, nurse educator, the manager for each unit or department should be assigned responsibility for A. Assuring that all staff members working in his/her unit department have received training in the designated time frame and attain a passing score on the competency verification test or observation, and collecting and retaining associate training records. It means the staff members working in organization has have training and a passing grade of competency verification to ensure the staff have knowledge or knew about the policy or revised policy. Table number 1. Policy and Procedure Development Guidelines. Recommendation. A suggestion or proposal as to the best course of action, especially one put forward by an authoritative body. Rationale. A set of reasons or a logical basis for a course of action or particular belief. Recommendation. Define all terms used within the policy. Means organization need to identify and recommend to those staff the new or revised policy to make easier to understand what is the new policy and what is all about. Rationale. It is useful to put this definition at the beginning of the policy. If terms are not defined, they are may be misconstrued by the staff and or when later scrutinized by the plaintiff lawyers. Next, refrain from using superlative words or statements such as highest, safest, best, be assured, ensure. The presence of superlative adjective is sometimes alleged by the plaintiff lawyers to be guarantee of a certain outcome. When we say plaintiff lawyer is a lawyer who are represent individuals who have been harmed physically or financially. Next, exercise caution when using absolutes such as shall, must, or do not unless intended as such. Many circumstances allow for clinical judgment. Another from recommendation: simple, recognized name for a policy. Rationale: naming a policy chain of command policy is preferable to naming it. Disagreement over patient's care staff will have an easier time locating a policy with a familiar name. Combine separate policy on the same subject into one policy. If it becomes lengthy, create a table of contents so the user can easily locate a specific section. For rationale, for instance, the policy for medical screening examinations, transfer in-out reporting, EMTALA, EMTALA, violation, etc. should appear in a single EMTALA, EMTALA policy. Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. In 1986, Congress enacted the Emergency Medical and Labor Act, or EMTALA, to ensure public access to emergency services regardless of ability to pay. Use the active rather than the passive voice when writing specific procedure action steps. Rational. Passive voice: the specimen's container should be labeled. Active voice: place a label on the specimen container. Ensure responsibility for carrying out each action step is explicitly stated, not implied. Each section should have two columns. The one on the left outlines the action to be taken, and the one to the right says who are responsible for carrying out each step. Obtain the sign-off of all stakeholders affected by each policy as well as each oversight committee or entity that review and approve of it. It is not uncommon to see nursing policy that outline actions an independently credentialed physicians is expected to take. Any policy that outlines medical staff responsibility warrants their input during development and subsequently reviews. Medical staff members also need to know where to access those policies. Another from recommendation: require each approving entity or person to sign it off on each individual policy. In years past, paper policy manuals often included a cover sheet as a sign-off page which showed the date of approval and signature of approving leader. Cover sheets for sign-off are not effective for electronic documents. Note the date of origin of the policy and each subsequent review for modification date within the body of the policy. Typically, on the last page near the sign-offs, date of origin, review date, review date. Pay particular attention to how the approvals for subsequently policy updates are documented in the electronic version of the policy. Establish naming and numbering conversations for use across the health system. For rationale, number all pages reflecting the total numbers of pages as well. Page 1 of 5, 2 of 5. Put the policy title number in the header of each page. For recommendation, note other policies on a similar subject that may be useful at the end of the policy. For cross-reference purposes, incorporate any related forms or computer screen images referred into a policy. For rationale, for example, the disclosure policy should cross-reference adverse event reporting policy, the patient compliant, and the bill hold adjustment policy. Also, for example, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act transfer from should be a part of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act policy. For recommendation, cite a specific federal or state statutes that are the basis for a policy or procedure with any other references. For rationale, it may also be helpful put a URL link to those statutes. When we follow these recommendation, and rationale, we can easily comply the policy to the staff members of the organizations. Another from recommendation, at the end of the document note evidence-based resources referred to when developing the policy. Noting the reference resource in each policy has both advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is the readers are aware of a professional source for more information on that subject. Another advantage is that it demonstrates the policy was developed with awareness of recognized professional guidelines and evidence-based best practices. However, potential risks arise when the organization policy differs from the site's professional guidelines or omits some key elements noted in those guidelines. B. If the cited professional guideline is updated following issuance of the policy and the organization has not updated the policy accordingly. For recommendation, some organizations simply place a list of resources as an attachment to each policy so that it is not a part of the actual page numbered policy document. For rationale, doing so means that the organization has to produce the policy during discovery. The list of resources need not to be turned over since it was not part of the policy itself. Avoid under specifying, put all essential elements in the policy. For rationale, for instance, starting that X action shall be taken, does not specify which staff member is responsible for carrying out the task. Avoid developing policies that outline actions that are more rigorous than the typical standard of care. If a hospital implements a policy that goes beyond what is the prevailing practice in the industry or the organization, will be held to the higher standard. Last, for recommendation, use caution when approving a policy on a specific topic or practice that simply states that staff shall be adhere to practice outlined in ABC textbook. Citing a reference as a policy may be appropriate in a narrow range of situations. Copying the URL or citation as your reference in your policy is a good idea to be recognized easily the topic want you to share to the other member or staff or the organization. For example, the American College of Radiology publishes an evidence-based comprehensive use of contrast medias manual with regular updates rather than develop its own policy on this subject, which would likely be shorter and oversimplified when compared to this manual. A hospital-based radiology department may wish to endorse the staff use of this manual with the provision noted to the right. For rationale, doing this implies A. The cited book is the most updated authoritative source on that subject. B. Responsible domain leaders have reviewed the book from cover to cover and have endorsed all of its contents. C. Staff members have ready access to that resource all the times. D. There is a process in place to monitor when a ACR issues a revised version of these manuals, so the organization does not continue to use guidelines that may have changed. And that's all for the recommendations and rationale. Another topic is all about the red rules. Red rules in medical field frustrated by continued reports of non-compliance with important patient safety rules. Some healthcare organization has classified selected requirements as red rules. Doing so, they believe gives greater emphasis to their importance and is intended to make staff pause and reconsider before they choose to act in a way that differs from the red rule. Red rules means must be followed exactly as specified except in the rare or urgent situation. When choosing which practice to designate as red rules, leader must first determine that the practice must be performed without fail, in every case without exception. Next, they must empower all staff to intercede the real-time stop the line if they witness a red rules violation since non-adherence poses a significant risk of patients' harm. Red rule violations are subject to discipline in many organizations, unless the party involved can provide legitimate reasons why the step was skipped. Leaders who choose to designate key safety practices as red rules should do so thoughtfully. Having too many red rules is difficult to manage and may be counterproductive. The Institute for Safety Medication Practices supports the use of red rules and emphasizes that should be few, well understood, and memorable. Practices worthy of classification as red rules may include performing a timeout before an invasive procedure, performing instrument punch and needle constellations counts during an invasive procedure, verifying a patient identity using two identifiers, requiring two nurses to independently verify the patient's identity and the intended blood products labeling prior to beginning a transfusion. Red rules means that cannot be broken. In highly reliable industry, red rules are few number, easy to remember, and associate with only processes that can cause serious harm to employees, customer, or the product line. And second to the last, standardizing policies across the system. When there are multiple hospitals within a healthcare system, there is a little justification for allowing each hospital to independently develop its own policies. Disparate policies can expose organizations to risk because a plaintiff lawyer may allege that one entity policy was less comprehensive than the other and thereby represented a lower standard of care. Policy and procedures of the following types lend themselves to being system policies. When we say standardizing, this is a framework of agreements which all relevant organizations must adhere to ensure all processes associated with the creation of a good performance of a service are performed within set of guidelines. Those designated to promote compliance with federal regulations, condition of participation, EMTAL, HIPAA, ADA, Safe Medical Device Act, or accreditations requirements. Those that describe specific patient care related practices, clinical practices guidelines approved by the medical staff for defined situation or cases. Last, electronic policy libraries. Most healthcare organizations have replaced proper policy and procedure manuals with electronic policy libraries available on the organization intranet, which greatly enhance accesses to optimize the useful of electronic libraries. It is useful to have a electronic policy libraries. Why? Because it can access easily to the informations or policies that procedures electronically before they got the manuals procedures. They should be replaced in the paper policy to the electronic policy library. Provide indices by policy name, subject, and in sponsoring domain. Next, incorporate word search functionality in order to facilitate researches for pertinent policies irrespective of their issuing domains. Without such a search function, staff may have difficulty locating the policy they are seeking. Do not prohibit access to policies of one domain to personnel in others' domain. There may be legitimate reasons why persons in other departments may need to refer those documents. Immediately remove a policy that has been officially retired or replaced from the active database and transfer it in the designated archives. Create an electronic archive for storing retired or prior versions of policy. This will facilitate access in response to legal discovery requests. Check with your corporate compliance office regarding organizational documents retentions policy. That's all. Thank you for listening. Hope you understand the report. Thank you.